When this story broke, I'm going to admit it. I do information and I communicate for a living. I didn't really know what was going on with Bob Menendez. I had no idea what the New Jersey U.S. Senator was up to. I know this. Chuck Schumer kept on running interference, and he would say, there's nothing really here. We're doing an investigation. There's nothing. And then it turned out there was really something, and the guy ended up, being charged with all sorts of really big crimes. To that end, I want to get with Isabel Vincent. She's an investigative reporter over at the New York Post. Isabel, nice to meet you. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So I appreciate you. I know that you got into like a storage room at the New York Post to do this with us today, and I really appreciate you making that happen. Thank you. What do I need to know about Bob Menendez? Because there was a massive cover-up, in my opinion, for a very long time. He did nothing. Then all of a sudden he's got free Mercedes and he's got gold bars and stuff. Take me from the beginning if you don't mind. When did we start hearing that there might have been something going on here?
Well, from the very beginning, just to your point earlier about Chuck Schumer keeping him on the Senate, it was useful for both of them. So at that point, and I'm talking a couple of years ago, 2023, when the second indictment against him came down,
right.
They knew that he was possibly corrupt. They kept him on because they didn't want to upset the balance of the Senate. So it was exactly, 100 senators. It was 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. But also, Bob Menendez used the Senate in order to say, look, I can't be guilty if I'm still being kept on. So it was to both of their benefits. But
I hear you. Well, let me stop you there. The reason I brought that up is because they launched George Santos out of the House before he was charged with anything. There was an ethics review, and they thought that he might have this, that, and the other. That was before he was charged and convicted. And what bothered me is that if you were a Republican, you could be launched out by your own party, yet you had Chuck Schumer running interference. I hadn't thought about what you just said. So you've got 50 and 50, plus you had Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. You needed Bob Menendez.
And Kamala Harris, I think she had to intervene in something like 27 times in votes during the Senate so that in order to break the tie.
Right.
So if you get rid of Bob Menendez, remember he's also a very important part of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the committee that signs off on international treaties and hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to countries around the world. So I could never understand why they're keeping them on, but I came to the conclusion that it was because it was beneficial to both Chuck Schumer and to Menendez. But to answer your question about when did all this start, this all starts, Bob Menendez, this was his second time before the courts, charged and convicted this time of corruption and bribery. The first time was back in 2015, 2016, where he was charged with the same thing. He had received something like $600,000 from his benefactor at the time, a very wealthy eye doctor in Palm Beach, Florida. He had done all these favors for him. He had gotten visas for all of his girlfriends who were coming from other parts of the world. He was not convicted then. It was the whole thing ended up in a hung jury. Right. So I think that emboldened Bob Menendez to go ahead and do what he did back in the early 2020 or so, after he met his second wife, and they launched this sort of Bonnie and Clyde like corruption, if you will,
right.
Receiving gold bars, receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash that the FBI found in his shoes, stuffed into his shoes and stuffed into the pockets of his jackets. Wow. In his closet in New Jersey, and receiving this money from, among other people, the Egyptian intelligence agencies, who wanted to cover up their part in the murder of a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in 2018 after he walked into the.
He was killed in Saudi Arabia, right? Not Egypt.
No, he was killed. He was killed in Turkey at the
Oh, in
Saudi
Turkey. Okay.
consulate in
All
Turkey
right.
in Istanbul, and he was Saudi. His cousin had been the arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. He was very well positioned in Saudi. In the Saudi hierarchy, but
Right.
he was an opposition activist. A lot of what he was writing ended up leading to the Arab Spring, which was very prominent in Egypt. So the
Right.
Egyptians were part of his murder. And Bob Menendez was accepting gold bars from the Egyptians at the time that everybody was investigating the murder. So he was killed in 2018. During that time, Bob Menendez did everything he could to blame the Saudis for his murder.
Right.
So the Saudis are involved, but it was the Egyptians who trained the Saudi murderers and who provided the drugs that knocked him out. I mean, it was a really horrific death because he was killed and then chopped up, and his remains were
Oh, my
never found.
goodness.
So he
It
never
is.
came out of that consulate.
It is Isabel Vincent. She's an investigative reporter over at the New York Post. You can go follow her right now on X. It's at ISA Report. And she's got a brand new book out. It's called Gold Bar Bob, The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator, written by Isabel Vincent and also Thomas Jason Anderson. Go and get this book because this is so involved. Yet it's one of those things that I think people will really want to find out everything about. It sounds like it was an open secret that this guy was pretty corrupt. Maybe they didn't know the depths of the corruption. And as you said, they wanted his vote. So you keep him on as long as you can. At what point that was too much? At what point did even the left have to say, we probably should get away from Bob now?
Well, I think when he was convicted.
So they held the line until he got convicted, really?
Not only that, he was allowed to stay. He had to resign his chairmanship of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he was still allowed on the committee, and he was still privy to all of their meetings. So he was privy to all of these security, he had security clearance. It's amazing to me that during this whole time that they didn't say, you know what, step aside here. But he was still a very active member of the government.
That is crazy to me. It is Isabel Vincent. Go get this book. So was it all about Khashoggi, or was he? I don't know if he's been convicted of this, allegedly on the take for decades. He was in there for a long time out of New Jersey. Was he always that guy? Did something turn him in what you found out by investigating this?
So we have to go back to the 1970s when he started off in Union City, where he grew up. While still in high school, he became a member of the school board, and part of the Democratic machine in Union City, which was ruled by a man named Bill Musto, who was the mayor of Union City and also a state senator. And it was through this that he ended up being a corrupt politician. But at one point, he moves against his mentor, Bill Musto, and he actually testifies against him at his corruption trial. So, which was seen in the politics of the Union City. He was like really a rat for doing that. And then you see it again. So he throws his mentor under the bus in the early 1980s at his trial, and then he throws his own wife under the bus during his trial. More recently in New York. And I think it's because the trial took place in federal court in New York, so no constituents there. He was sort of unknown to the jury. And the other thing was that the prosecutors allowed the jury in the first days of the trial to hold on to the gold bars. So they actually held on to this gold bullion, and you could really see the corruption. Whereas I think in the first trial that took place in New Jersey, yes, there were allegations of corruption, but you didn't actually see the fruits of that corruption. You couldn't hold it in your hand. So I think that had a lot to do with him being convicted.
Gold Bar Bob, The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator. It is Isabel Vincent. She wrote this along with Thomas Jason Anderson, a government watchdog. And I can't wait to go and read this book. It sounds very, very involved and very interesting. How many gold bars did he have? How much was it worth? And were those only recent? Or was he getting gold bars for years?
Well, the first clue for Tom and me was when we saw him putting gold bullion on his disclosures. One year he amended his disclosures, and he said that his wife had sold $400,000 worth of gold
Wow.
of gold bullion. And this was back in like, before the FBI or around the time of the FBI raids, but before anybody knew of any of, before the indictment.
Yeah.
And so we were like, what's he doing with that?
Yeah.
And then they actually found at his home, when they did raid his home, and they raided his home 5 times, they found $150,000 worth of gold bars, and they found $490,000 in cash. It was so much cash that they had to bring in machines to count it. That's what the FBI said at the time.
I mean, it just seems like it's in plain sight. Is it true that the gold bars had some sort of Egyptian writing on it? Were they obviously Egyptian or no?
No, but they came from, some of them were traced to a businessman, actually Lebanese businessman who he had done favors for, or that he had been accused at the time of doing favors for. So there was an Egyptian businessman, an Egyptian American businessman, and then a Lebanese American businessman, and they're both in prison. They were convicted. They were tried and convicted alongside Menendez.
So from the $400,000 that was sold to over the $160,000 or whatever it was that they found, it's over $500,000 in gold. He's got a brand new Mercedes. How much was that worth?
Oh, that was worth like maybe close to $100,000. It was a Mercedes convertible, and this was one of the bribes. And what had happened was that his wife, his fiancée at the time, got involved in a car crash in New Jersey. She ran over a pedestrian and killed him, and it totaled her car. And so she needed a new car, and she went to this Egyptian American benefactor,
Right.
and also a man, an insurance broker who ended up working out a plea deal with the government. He became the star witness. He was the guy who got her the car. And what's amazing is that he's the hero of this whole story. He's the insurance. Right. You don't often think of insurance brokers as being heroes, but this guy Jose Uribe from New Jersey ended up, I think he spoke to the feds something like 36 times. He was very disciplined. Menendez's defense team made him look like an awful person, but he stuck to it. And he was threatened, and he stuck to it. And it was thanks to his testimony that both Menendez and his wife were convicted. It is
Isabel Vincent. She wrote this book along with Thomas Jason Anderson. It's called Gold Bar Bob. Gold Bar Bob. Go get it on Amazon. The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator. I'm going to ask you something. And I'm not going to ask you for an opinion on Biden, but I'm going to assert this. I'm 59 now. I've been watching politics my entire life. Been in this business for 36 years. I have always thought Joe Biden was a pretty corrupt guy. And the reason I bring that up is I really think Joe Biden, when he first started in Delaware, wasn't necessarily corrupt. I thought that he really did want to do for the community. It seemed as though he did. So I'm prefacing my question to you about this guy, about Menendez, with that. I think many times they do get in for the right reasons. Was Menendez, when he first started as a senator, always this guy from your investigating, or was he a guy that really did want to do well for New Jersey?
He was like a star in high school. It's amazing to me how much I went through his yearbooks, and he was like on every team. He was on every debating team. There were like poetic essays that he wrote for the yearbook about how we could change the world, we could help people. So I think he started off, certainly as a teenager, he was going to help humanity, and he was going to go into politics to help people. But I think he got caught up in the system. This again, all I can use to describe it, it was this democratic machine, which was so corrupt in Union City. It was all about patronage, that as soon as he stepped into, onto the school board, his mother got a job, his sister got a job later when he married, because he married very young. His wife got a job, and it was all, this was how things worked. And I just think he carried that, to, into the New Jersey government, into Congress, and then into the Senate. And he was always
Vincent. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, he was very proud of himself that he had he had become one of 100 U.S. senators. He kept repeating that to people like throughout.
It's a big deal. No, it is a big deal, and it sounds like he sort of wanted to be that guy in the beginning as well. But then, like you said, the machine gobbles you up. Let's talk more about Khashoggi. Well, I know that from your investigation, from what came out in the trial and everything else, that he was involved in getting money to make sure that he took the heat off of those who did Khashoggi. Is there any evidence that would suggest he knew what was going to happen before it happened? Because how do you just grab a journalist and just off him and you just get away with it? I mean, they didn't, eventually they had to apologize or whatever, but is there any indication that he knew it was going to happen and covered it up from the start, or he found out later and they said, hey, here's a bunch of gold bullion, here's a bunch of money, make sure you help us out here?
So in the Senate, in the sentencing documents, the prosecution had a paragraph about how the head of Egyptian intelligence came to Bob Menendez and asked if he could. They actually went to his wife first, and they said, can you help us? Because we're about to appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they have some very hard questions about our part in the Khashoggi murder. So this is after the fact. So this is after October 2nd, 2018, when Khashoggi walks into that consulate in Istanbul. And so Bob works with the Egyptian intelligence. Remember, they're paying him through these go-betweens in New Jersey. He provides them with talking points for, their appearance before his own Senate committee. I mean, how crazy is that? And at a time when everybody was blaming only Saudi Arabia because Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate. Right. What was missing from that scenario was the fact, and it came out in 2021, was the fact that the Egyptians had provided the drugs, that the people who murdered Khashoggi had flown to Egypt, had trained in Egypt, and had gone back to Istanbul with the drugs to kill this guy. So no, Menendez was not involved in it from the beginning, but they came to him afterwards for damage control. And again, Menendez, knowing all that he knew, also blamed the Saudis for everything. And so you got to wonder how the geopolitics that came out of that, because how did that damage our relationship with Saudi Arabia? And at that point, you'll recall that Donald Trump kept saying, well, they weren't, that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, he didn't, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he didn't know. And everybody said, oh yeah, well, that's Trump. Well, of course he's going to say that. But in fact, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, one of the most powerful institutions in the United States, was not telling us that, oh, by the way, Egypt has been paying me this money, and I'm going to say that Egypt is innocent of any wrongdoing here. Wow. I mean, that's what happened, and it was pretty. When you look at it in hindsight, it's crazy.
Well, it's clear that Egypt does this, and they know they've got this guy on the payroll, basically. They know that they've got a friend in the Senate, and because of that friend in the Senate who's been there a really long time, he's going to be very convincing. I'm glad that Trump ended up being right, but I mean, I even thought that it was in Saudi Arabia. It was the actual Saudi Arabian embassy or the consulate in Turkey where this happened, and it wasn't done by the Saudis at all. It was done by Egypt, who trained the Saudis, who brought in the drug. Look, you got to get the book. Go and get the book. Right, I can't explain it because the woman who's been following this whole time is going to explain it to you. Menendez was convicted of 16 felony counts. We're talking bribery, extortion, fraud, acting as a foreign agent, obstruction of justice, and you're actually positing that that's not everything he did. Is there more?
We don't know everything he did because he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or the ranking member for so long that, what else did he do for Egypt during this time? Like, at one point at the trial, it comes out that that the Egyptians asked him to find out who worked at the American embassy in Cairo. So he's giving out the names
Oh,
of
wow.
all of the Americans who are working there. And it's like, okay, it doesn't sound like much, but what if those people, what if he's giving undercover names?
Yeah.
And why do the Egyptians want to know that? And this is a man who has access to that information. I don't think it's public. And if he did that, like, what other things were going on? What don't we know? These are the
Yeah.
things that we do know because of the prosecution and because of their research. I mean, the Khashoggi thing came out of, like I said, it's a paragraph in the sentencing memo. It
Right.
doesn't mention Khashoggi's name, but it says it talks about the way he was killed, and only one journalist who was an American resident and was chopped up. That could only be Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah.
So it's and a lot of people miss that, actually. A lot of reporters, sort of, I think one reporter got it and it was just sort of in, a line in a story. But when we looked at that, when my co-author Thomas Anderson and I looked at it, we thought, what? Like, he covered this up? Like, what else did he do?
Right. And one would assume that he'd been doing something the entire time. Gold Bar Bob, The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator, written by Isabel Vincent. We've got her on now. And also Thomas Jason Anderson. Go and get it on Amazon. Let me finish with this. Why Egypt? He's an Hispanic guy from New Jersey. He's not somebody who's got any ties that I know of, unless his wife was Egyptian or something. Why Egypt? Why did they know they can get their claws in him, and why was he open to it?
Because one of the wife's friends, a man named Wael Hanna, was a Coptic Christian from Egypt. He was a businessman in New Jersey. He wanted to get the halal certification contract for the government of Egypt. He had no experience certifying halal products, but magically, with Bob Menendez's help, calling up, people in the U.S. government, allowing him to do this, he got this $1 billion contract. And so it was Wael Hanna who was very connected to Egyptian intelligence, and also Fred Davies, who was the other New Jersey businessman who was convicted along with Menendez and his wife. He was a developer in Edgewater, New Jersey. So he developed all of these beautiful buildings along the Hudson River. One of the buildings, I looked into the ownership of the buildings, and one of those buildings where Wael Hanna, the Egyptian American businessman, lived, and Davies lived, was actually owned by the government of Egypt. I'm like,
wow.
What?
Wow. Yeah.
And we reported this at the Post, again, but I don't think people were as horrified as I was by it. So what's really, and this was before Menendez was indicted. I'm like, what's going on here with Egypt? And then with Gettr, Gettr also, they were both, Menendez and his wife, convicted of FARA violations with respect to acting as a foreign agent with respect to Gettr. And this was because Menendez had introduced one of the members of the Qatari royal family to Fred Davies, who needed investment to build a luxury condo building in Edgewater. And so this was another thing, that they were doing, that bringing, Qatari money to New Jersey.
Right.
But so, when you say why Egypt, it was all about money.
That's really something. It's Isabel Vincent. I've got to ask you this. Why wasn't he charged with spying or treason? If he's getting the names of Americans that are working at the consulate in Cairo, if he's actually helping to cover up an international murder of a journalist, a guy who lived here, why isn't it more than that? Why is it just like he's acting as a foreign agent? That's a whole lot more if you're literally giving the names of Americans to a foreign entity, unbeknownst to the American government in which you work.
I think that's a harder bar. And even despite everything we said, I think that's a harder bar to prove. And I think this was one of the star cases of U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, and a Democrat. Like, when Menendez says he was a victim of lawfare, that this was something that the Republicans had hatched against him.
Right.
Well, the U.S. Attorney at the time was appointed by Democratic president.
Right.
And And so I think that the bar for treason is much higher than it is, for acting as a foreign. Even the bar for acting as a foreign agent is huge. I mean, this was an historic trial and conviction, because he was convicted of 2 counts of that.
Yeah. It's all very interesting. One thing that bothers me, and I think that you would agree with this, and I'm glad you got the book out now so people can learn about it. Gold Bar Bob, The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator, by Isabel Vincent and also by Thomas Jason Anderson. I don't think people understand how serious this case is. This may have been the precipice to what we knew as the Democrat Party falling apart. I mean, this is a humongous story, like a once-in-a-century story, and I just don't think it's gotten the proper press. Would you agree that the so-called legacy media, not the New York Post, but the legacy media, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, these people, have by and large not reported it to the level that maybe it should have gotten?
I think so, because, I mean, there were a lot of factors in the 2024 election and the routing of the Democratic Party. Right. And, the most obvious being, Joe Biden's decline, right. Kamala Harris as a candidate, Hunter Biden, all of the corruption involving, the influence peddling that was going on.
Yes.
But again, I go back to your first question, like, why was Bob Menendez allowed to stay on the Senate, and to stay on the Foreign Relations Committee? Why was nobody up in arms about that? Like, what does that say to the electorate? What does that say to people? It's like, corruption's okay. Just, and this is the second time that at least he was indicted. And I guess their excuse is, well, we'll let the courts decide. But it was pretty obvious. And again, I go back to what the prosecutors showed in that first week to the jury. Here are the gold bars that we found in the basement of Bob Menendez's home. It was so tangible. Yeah. And I think when people were faced with that, when they saw that, and then they saw that he was still around, still, insisting that he was going to be this legislator, I just think that spelled doom for the Democrats during that election.
And it's a report over on X, ISAREPORT over on X. Get the book called Gold Bar Bob. Let me ask you something off the beaten path. You may have an answer. You might not want to talk about it. But you're writing for the New York Post, so you're going to have more of your finger on the pulse than I will. Chuck Schumer is going to get a challenge from AOC. I think they're both fools, but that's just my opinion. Chuck Schumer was the one guy who could have exposed Menendez a long time before it ended up happening. Do you think AOC uses that to her advantage? Do you think that he's in trouble because of Bob Menendez specifically?
I don't think enough people think about. I mean, to your last point, I don't think enough people think about that. I think we all need to look at how Bob Menendez got away with his corruption for so long, right, and who facilitated it. Was it Schumer? Was it other people? I mean, he'd been in the Senate for since 2006. I think we need to look at that and ask some very serious questions. Why was he allowed to stay?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, because over in the House, when Marjorie Taylor Greene, did something Nancy Pelosi didn't like, they took her off all of her committees. It seems to me that the left will always circle the wagons and the right will always throw people, under the wagon because they want to get along with the left. Is that changing, do you think? Is the dynamic changing in the House and Senate to where Republicans finally are getting a backbone? Because as we've just talked about for the last 30 minutes, this guy Bob Menendez got away with it and could have been caught a whole lot earlier had those in his same party said, you can't be on this committee. There are questions about your relationships with foreign entities. Is that changing, do you think?
I don't know if it's changing, but one of the interesting things about Bob Menendez that we haven't talked about is who was supporting him besides Chuck Schumer. And that was the Clintons. Right. That was Hillary Clinton. He was seen as an important figure because he had the Hispanic vote. Like, he was a Cuban. He made much of the fact that he was a Cuban immigrant. He was anti-Fidel Castro for years. He was very hardline on Cuba. So he had the support of the Cubans in Miami who were mostly Republican voters,
Right.
and had the support of the Democrats. So I think we have to look at who were the people that were keeping him in for so long, and it was Biden, fellow senator at one point. It was Hillary Clinton, whose campaign for senator he had been super helpful with, and it was Bill Clinton who was the first person to help Bill Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Was it Bob Menendez?
Bob Menendez, who said,
Wow.
who had a very important speech in Congress, let he who is not guilty, cast the first stone.
Wow.
Why are we so upset about this intern? So you have to look at who his base was of support, and I think that's why he was allowed to stay for so long.
Did Barack Obama throw him some cover too, or no?
Yes, Barack Obama was very prominent during some of his reelection campaigns. Barack went out to campaign for Menendez in New Jersey.
Wow. It's all so dirty. I feel like taking a shower. I mean, honestly, it's all just nasty and dirty. And I'm so glad that you're uncovering this, because I think the American people have to understand. And by the way, I'm happy to report that Miami-Dade County, the Cubans down there are now voting Republican, which they probably were always conservative. But I think you're right. Somebody like a Menendez that they felt that they can see kinship with might have been helping out for a long time. It is Isabel Vincent, investigative reporter over at the New York Post. Go to on X, she's at ISA-REPORT. The book is called Gold Bar Bob, The Downfall of the Most Corrupt U.S. Senator. She wrote it along with Thomas Jason Anderson, and it's available right now on Amazon. Thank you for giving me all the time today. You really filled in a lot of holes that I had in the story, and I can't wait to read the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
All right. You bet. We're back after this. Stay right here.